I remember when I was in Gaza and I'd watch some of, your debates and you were saying that you were having a moral quandary over what was going on. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, it's not a moral quandary for me and it's not a moral quandary for millions of people around the world. Like, we're sat here and I'm putting headless children and I'm handing them over to mothers and they're hugging them and they're putting them into body bags. When we have a mass casualty event, I'm stepping over children as they're bleeding out to death on the floor because I know we don't have the medical equipment to treat them. When I'm trying to use an ultrasound machine to do a scan on someone, the cords have been cut because Israeli soldiers have cut the cords of ultrasound machines. I've had family members who have died because the dialysis machines are filled with bullet holes. So, just to put it into context, the first 24 days of this conflict, 1,900 children were killed in the first 24 days. That's more than any other conflict anywhere around the world in a whole year and in this tiny population of Gaza. And I think anybody like me or any Palestinians or anyone really that knows the situation, they knew what was coming and we knew what was happening when they were calling, them human animals and Amalek and we're going to cut off food, water and electricity and 1,900 children killed in a dozen or so days. I think we all knew what was coming.
But when you say you knew what was coming, and just to be clear, my moral quandary was really that I felt after October the 7th, Israel didn't just have a right to defend itself, but a duty. A terror attack of that scale, 1,200 people killed, nearly 7,000 more wounded, 250 plus kidnapped, grandmothers, babies, I mean, Holocaust survivors. It was on such a horrific scale. Obviously, Israel was going to respond with force. My quandary was simply, at what point is this a proportionate response? And I didn't know the answer. I do now. I've been saying for a few months now that what is happening now is beyond, to me, any kind of proportionate response. And it seems to be never ending. And that's why this has to end. But going back to October the 7th, notwithstanding, obviously, you're the son of a Gaza refugee, and of course that will inform how you view things. But none of this would be happening in the way it's been happening without what Hamas did that day. So what do you feel about what Hamas inflicted on its own people by doing what it did?
So look, I think the framing of that is a little bit problematic. Like, what Hamas did to its own people, what's been going on didn't start on October the 7th. It's been 75 years. And I can attest to that because I was ethnically cleansed out of Gaza and so was my family, So it didn't start on October the 7th. What do I think about October 7th? Horrific. Taking of women and children as hostages, killing innocent people. As a Palestinian, I know how much that hurts. So all I have is nothing but sympathy for the people who suffered on October the 7th. But at the same time, people started this story on October the 7th. And for me, growing up in poverty, growing up without running water in the house, growing up watching, us have to give up our savings all the time to support family back in Gaza and back. For me, it never started on October the 7th. For me, it started every day when I was being bullied at school. It started when I had to move from city to city because my dad never got a permanent job. Those are the kind of things where, I look at it and there was a lot of emotions on October the 7th, as a Palestinian.
Did any part of you feel it was justified? I've heard some people categorise what they did as resistance, which is a justification for what happened. I don't think you can do that. I mean, to me, it was an appalling terrorist attack. And the reason I framed the question the way I did was that when it later turned out that Hamas had this huge tunnel system where they all hid, but the civilians were left to be under the raining bombs from Israel, which were inevitably going to come, given the scale of what Hamas did. That's what I meant by the way I phrased the question, which is how much do Palestinian people, when they look back on that, how much do they blame Hamas for inevitably bringing this on them?
I mean, look, before Hamas, it was the PLO.
Right.
And before the PLO, it was the Egyptians, and before then, it was somebody else. Look, at the end of the day, the root cause is the problem. The root cause is the occupation. The root cause is inequality. The root cause is that I don't have the right to return to my home, that my father doesn't have the right to return, that my grandfather is buried in Gaza, my dad's never been able to go see him. When we talk about the root causes, when we talk about, what Hamas did on October the 7th, this is just a cycle. And the cycle always comes back to, instead of looking at the symptoms, I don't want to look at the symptoms, I want to look at the causes. The causes is inequality, is a lack of justice, and I just want justice for the Palestinian people. And I don't want that justice to be violence and killing of innocent Israelis.
You want the same human rights?
I just want the same human rights.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible? I mean, you know, I liken it sometimes to what happened in Northern Ireland, where for decades people thought this could never get resolved. People living amongst each other, you know, loyalists and IRA, but eventually they got there. They got to peace. Do you think it's possible to end up with a two-state solution where Palestinians live with the same rights as Israelis?
Well, look, I think the Israelis are making it very difficult to have a two-state solution. You know, with the expansion of settlements in the West Bank and moving in...
Which is appalling.
Which is moving in millions of settlers. It's making a two-state solution impossible. Really, what's going to happen is eventually there'll be a one-state solution with equality for Muslims and Jews and anybody else living on that land. And eventually Palestinians will have the right to return. And they will return back to Palestine. And I feel like, you know, it's kind of ironic, really, because they've avoided so much in giving the Palestinians a state and a home. And they've tried to destroy this two-state solution, that eventually what will happen is a one-state solution. And eventually the majority that they've tried to build by ethnically cleansing, by taking up more and more land, will go away, because eventually the Palestinians will return home. And eventually, given all the Palestinian refugees all around the world, eventually the Palestinians will outnumber the, you know, the Jewish population. And that's, I think, what's worrying them. And I think what needs to happen is there either needs to be a conversation where you need to have a proper two-state solution, or it needs to be a one-state solution.